in writing.
If you say anything, when you say something particularly
Yes.
clever, it will be captured for posterity, and you can.
Yes.
I these days I just want to do everything multi-purpose. So just having a recording that you can pull from and use for newsletters or whatever, it's just so helpful. So,
Agreed.
oh well, how about I admit our people who are actually here on time?
Yeah.
Oh, bringing everybody in. Yes, please. Viewers have joined. Excellent. Thank you for joining us. This is my first time experimenting with Google Meet in sort of a webinar setting. So thank you everyone for being my guinea pigs. Especially thank you to you, Elise, for signing on and signing up to have this conversation. I hope everybody can hear us. I think the chat is enabled, but those of you who are using Google tools, you may know that some of the functionality is not the same as in Zoom and some other video platforms. So we're we're all on this learning journey together. But I am committed to moving my creating greater coherence in my tools use. So for the benefit for people who are just joining, we're just getting started. It's going to take another few minutes for people to trickle in. And I was just riffing on the idiosyncrasies of running webinars on Google Meets versus other platforms we have all learned since the pandemic. And roughly the format. So again, hi, Elise. You and I were meant to talk anyway. So all we're doing is we're having a private chat that a few people have signed up to listen into. A couple of you submitted questions beforehand. If any questions come up, I think the chat is enabled. You should be able to message us. If not, then I apologize for my oversight and the ineptitude with the settings. And we are recording this. Elise and I both have an interest in capturing the conversation for our respective uses. So if that's not okay, unfortunately, the only choice you have is to leave. Although, again, we're not displaying any of you. So this is a very clever setting in Google Meet. You can just, we have an audience, Elise, we just don't see them, which kind of works for me. I think I shared with you in the green room that I'm an introvert, and like having a bunch of faces staring at me is one of my least favorite things to do in this day and age. So again, thank you for everybody who is lurking in the background. We know you're there, but we don't have you on screen with us. Anyway, let's just get into it. We'll just admit more people as and when they show up. But basically, just want to do a little bit of scene setting. I wrote a thing about we're going to need a ton of more better businesses. that's fully technical. My English, my professional English, super technical, super high level. But basically, the basic insight I had was, oh man, so much is breaking at this moment in history. No matter where you sit on the political side of which side of the political divide you sit on, things are in turmoil and in massive change. And businesses generally can be a force for good and a force for bringing about the world we want to live in. How do people build these businesses for the future that we all want and need? And I wrote something about that sort of on my Substack, and you came back at me saying, hey, if you ever want to do something together, let's talk. And so we talked and decided, why not have a more public conversation about some of the intricacies of building businesses that are better for the world. And there's a lot of and my personal background in all of this is that I'm a big advocate for businesses that are not venture funded, businesses that we might call zebras and distinct from unicorns. And I'm also obsessed with the inner workings of those businesses. It's one thing to say sort of philosophically, we need these more regenerative businesses. Regenerative isn't a new word. When I was first coming up, the word was sustainable, right? Same idea. We need businesses that sort of embody a different mindset. But then having worked in a few of those, we fall back on some of the same old models that got us into the mess that we find ourselves in the first place. And so I thought it would be interesting to have an occasional webinar, occasional conversation that we've now turned into a webinar series with people who are sort of similarly obsessed with the minutia of running businesses. And something about that intrigued you. So why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and how you find yourself here today.
Yeah, thank you, Astrid. I'm very glad that I've started reading your Substack and have continued to. My name is Elise. I use she, her pronouns, and I am part of the Conscious Revolution team. And Conscious Revolution, I've been with Conscious Revolution for about 5 years now, and I'm just like kind of a lifelong employee. I have been working since I was like 12, 13, so middle school. My friend's parents owned a restaurant, bus tables. So I've really witnessed employment through many different ages and eras and stripes and different, different kinds of things. But really the biggest through line for me is that I've almost exclusively worked for the founder of a business. So I've always been there kind of right alongside them as we're creating a thing, as it's evolving, as it's becoming what it's intended to be. And there's no exception. Tara Jenkins is the founder of Conscious Revolution, and she started the business in 2019, and I joined her about 18 months after she started. And we continue to offer a holistic approach to leadership development, and through that is part of one of the things that we focus on is the human resources portion of organizations and the development of organizations.
Got it. And, I thought human resources would be such a good topic to start this occasional series with, because it is one of the hardest things I've ever encountered, both as an employee and as an employer, as a leader in sort of socially aware, social impact type organizations. And it is a highly regulated domain. So it's one of the hardest to change, right? It's, you might say, oh, I can pick the corporate form I want to be in. Like, I want to be a co-op because that represents my values. Or I want to be a C Corp because I need the opportunity to have investors. Or I might be a nonprofit. And the employment laws and the rules that we have inherited about human resources basically stay the same, right? No matter what setting you're in. And so I want to maybe have you talk a little bit about some of the sort of collisions you have seen between the aspirations and intentions of an entrepreneur or a business and the reality of human resources, the way both you and I have probably learned them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is very true of human resources is that most people, a lot of people, at least maybe of a certain generation, we started learning human resources based in compliance, right? Like you were saying, there's the legal side. It's you have to learn the compliance pieces first. And particularly when I was younger and learning human resources and getting into that space, I never really had anyone to help guide that process. But B, I wasn't a fully formed person. I had a lot of my own stuff that I hadn't dealt with. It was informing how I was showing up in a human resources setting, which I think remains true for a lot of leaders and professionals. I think that underneath human resources, and even forgetting the legal compliance stuff for a second, there's it's human based. It's in the subject, and not all humans are as self-aware or as emotionally intelligent, and so all of that stuff comes into play when human resources is being actually practiced in relationship, because that's really what employment is. It's a relationship with money, I guess, involved. And I think there are a lot of things that are easy to kind of lean back on as an employer, and luckily I see this a lot less now, but I think it's very easy to say oh, well, minimum wage is $7.25, so that's what I should pay people. That's the law, so I'm going to follow the law as it is written. Or Astrid, you and I have talked about at-will employment. Oh, that's the law in these states, I'm going to follow that law. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to saying okay, I understand what the law is, and I'm not going to break it, but I'm going to make a decision to operate from a different place. because so many of the laws and the structures are perpetuating power and compliance and fear, when really the way to strengthen a business and have it flourish is to practice trust and mutuality and respect. And those they don't really fit together.
Yeah, I think I was reminded actually in the preparation for our conversation, I wrote another quick little blog post on how not to fire, because I had just met with a former colleague who showed up just hangdog. I mean, he was just miserable. I said, what happened? And he basically had just had to help one of his employees fire another team member. And in this case, it was somebody who had come up to the end of a performance improvement plan, like another one of those lovely devices, right, that are used in sort of 20th century American corporatism. And the person was at the end of the rope, basically, and was fired at the guidance of this organization's HR department, by literally you being asked into the room, you're told you're done, effective immediately, and then you're walked out of the premises. Like
this has happened to me. This is not a foreign concept to me.
This is not a foreign concept, right? And I'm not sure how much audience participation we have given the way I configured the settings, but I'm betting there's some people who are nodding right now or raising their hands. You've been frog marched out of a nonprofit organization, a social impact organization. I had another friend who was let go as the CEO of a major humanitarian organization at the end of a board meeting, without any preamble, any lead up that there's maybe an issue about his performance or any opportunity to remedy it, right? Yeah. And I was just so struck by, here we are, it's the 21st century. We're working in these settings that are trying to do good in the world. And at the end of the co-working relationship, we default to these really toxic, dehumanizing patterns and behaviors and protocols, because that's how we have to do it. Like, does it actually protect us from a legal perspective? Is that the right way to do, because we think?
I think that's what people think. I think that's what people think. I think they're like, oh, well, legally, I have to do it, with these particular steps in mind. And, HR traditionally will tell you, document, because that way, if somebody then points the finger back at you, you're like, no, on April 3rd, I wrote it down. They said this thing. And that is a very common theme in human resources. And while I don't necessarily disagree that documentation is important, I think documentation for the purposes of coming to shared understanding and agreement should be the goal, not to be able to use it as evidence when you're in a position of conflict. Right. I was fired from a job that the previous week I had led a regional manager meeting. And the next week I was brought into a conference room with my HR representative and the president of the company. And the actual reason I was given for being fired was that I had intentionally and consistently undermined his authority. So whatever that means to you, I will let you interpret it, because it meant virtually nothing to me at the time. And I was just walked out of the building and access cut off immediately. So yeah, that feeling of, just total shock and being like, wait, what just happened? And I asked, he got up and left the meeting almost immediately. And I turned to the HR person. I was like, you got anything else for me? Like, what was that? And she was like, oh, do you want me to go back and get him so you can ask him more questions? And I was like, no, I really don't. Because it was so humiliating. And so I was just like, I don't even know what I would do with that person in this room right now. It's I think part of the default to that is discomfort. Like, it's so hard to have a conversation. And one of the things that I see most, and I think rarely when I see it at this point, is it intended to be malicious. But people are really want to be nice, and they don't want there to be like a conflict, and as opposed to saying like, oh, this is just going to be a conversation. people are like, oh, I'm afraid of conflict. Well, it's like, are you afraid of conflict? Or are you afraid of just like saying the thing that needs to be said? Because those are maybe not the same. And so we see so many people who are like the example of, getting fired, where it's like they're doing this performance improvement plan, but really the person who's on the plan doesn't actually understand that at the end of it, if they haven't done X, Y, and Z thing, they're getting fired. Like that's never been explicitly stated. It's like, that is so unfair and such a miss as a way to be like, for make sure that everyone is on the same page with the same understanding.
And it seems to me, like, I mean, thinking back to my former colleague scenario, right? Like, it seems to me like if you have an explicit agreement about accountability in the job, and how do we know, and how do we remedy, and how do we note when something is going out of alignment, even if you're within the construct of the law, right? You can have a way to say, here's what will happen when when we come to the end of the performance improvement period and part ways. Like, you can have a pre-agreement about how it happens, kind of like a prenup,
Right. Well, I mean, and that's, with that, we work with a couple of clients who do, who will do that. They will say like, hey, we decided, like, we were on this path together, and, how's it going for you? Like, it's not really working for us. And we've kind of decided that this isn't going to work long term. And so instead of just like parting ways, like there's always the option for the other person to say like, great, I'm leaving, goodbye. Yeah. But they will often extend, it depends on the role and the exact circumstances, but some period of either working notice or pay beyond when that person is actually working, to help the transition. Because what I've seen so much of, and what I don't think there's enough of, is there's not a lot of employer accountability when employee-employer relationships don't work.
Right.
It's always the employee's fault. And it's always something the employee did, and rarely is the employer looking at like, okay, like, how was the onboarding? What is there something that I could do differently there? Like, what is the training process? What was my development plan? Like, what am I doing to support this person, not only professionally, but like as a whole human being? Because they're not just like, they're not just a robot person that, I mean, I'm thinking about Severance, where it's like the TV show where he shows up and he's just at work. They're whole people who have other things going on. And it's like, does any of that get taken into consideration?
Right.
And how?
Have you seen it done well? Like, what are some, like, I'm just thinking back to, like, I have my own horror stories of how I had to fire people under the constraints of what was considered best practice. And don't get me started on all the nonprofits in the world that have adopted sort of like corporate America's, best practices.
Right, the schlock that we've all been practicing.
Yeah, like 360 feedback reviews. Like, I mean, that's a whole different topic. And so I have had the horror story of being in the room with the person I'm firing, and then getting the backlash and getting accusations of wrongful termination, yada yada yada, and like going down the whole like legal rabbit hole, letting that play out. And frankly I can understand it, right? When you're being let go in that horrible a way, of course you're going to turn around and see if there's anything that you can do to make yourself feel better, make it feel right, make it get some kind of justice for yourself, or at least revenge. But I've also seen it done well. I was actually let go from I'd stepped in as the successor to a founder in an established organization, and if you know anything about founder transitions, you know that there's a 50-50 chance it can go wrong, right, for a number of reasons that have nothing to do with the employee and everything to do with the person you're replacing, or some combination thereof. And that was actually a really cordial split. We sat down with the board chair, said this isn't working, and we had made explicit agreements about how we would track how the transition is going. And so I knew that it wasn't feeling right. It wasn't sitting right for him. I felt constrained in how I was being supported or not by the board. And it was a very amicable conversation about, okay, this isn't working. How are we going to do this? I was able to basically prescribe the timeline and sort of the conditions for my departure, the timing of the announcement, how I wanted to do it. There was none of that, like, take your stuff and leave, right? And so that felt really good. And because I've had a good, bad experience, like, being let go from a job that you have inhabited for a long time and that felt good and gave you a lot of your identity and whatnot. But as a bad experience, it was a remarkably good experience.
What would you say is different from that experience versus a bad experience? Was there anything notable that you could immediately pinpoint? Because I have a guess, but I'd be curious if there's anything that you thought about.
I mean, in that case, we had the foresight at the beginning of the working relationship. I'd worked there for a very long time, but when I was promoted into that successor position, I said there's a good chance this could go wrong. So we anticipated that things could go off the rails, and had agreed to, essentially, it was like a prenup. I'm going back to that analogy of the prenup. We said, okay, how will we navigate when things aren't going well?
Yep.
So that's one, like being really clear-eyed about, what might happen here. And then the second part was, I mean, I asked the question, is there something I can do to remedy it? But the answer was he wasn't really ready to retire yet. And it's like, what do you say to the charismatic founder of an organization who has oh, oops, I'm not ready to put myself out to pasture. So that wasn't an option in that case. But the idea of the other thing that was really important was the ability to say, like, here is what I would take with me. Here's how I would like to do this. Like, having agency is the short answer to your question.
Yeah, which I think is a huge part of the process that like gets lost, because so much of employer-employee relationships generally is the employer dictating to the employee, like, this is what you're doing, this is when you're doing it, this is why. And so creating situations where there are agency, even in, transitions or exits, is hugely empowering for the employee to decide, like, okay, I do want to, like, for example, we have a client who had a big transition with someone on their leadership team, and they didn't quite have the skill set that they needed for this leadership role. And instead of saying, all right, well, you're fired, goodbye, they said, look, we'd love to have you stay on, because it's going to take us probably 6 to 8 weeks to find somebody and hire them and then get them onboarded. So we'd love to do a 3-month working notice where you stay employed the whole time. You can absolutely look for other work. We will have an open dialogue about where we are in our recruiting and hiring process. You can have an open dialogue with us about where you are in your next thing process. And they offered this person a bonus for agreeing to do that in addition to their regular salary. And the transition was like kind of beautiful. Like, they now have someone who still promotes their stuff on LinkedIn. They're still in connection with them. They're an ambassador for the organization because that exit went smoothly and the transition went smoothly. And they didn't end up staying for the full duration of the working notice. They ended up, like, it started to feel, they were like, oh, I'm just like kind of in the way here. So I actually am going to go and I'm going to do my thing. And it just like worked. It went smoothly. And part of that was the agency piece, because when the initial conversation happened, the employer basically said, like, do you want to do this? Take some time, like, go home, talk about it with your friends, your family, whomever you would like to talk about it with. We can talk more about it, but we need to make a plan to move this thing forward in one way or another. Let's determine that together, as opposed to just saying, okay, you're fired, your last day is Thursday, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece where, if we're not explicit about it, right, then we're at risk of falling back on the best practices of the last century, which are really terrible practices.
Well, there's a saying out there that I hear a lot of HR folks in my world saying, which is clear is kind. So being clear and offering clarity is kindness, because the clearer you are, then the more opportunity the other person has to make an actually informed decision.
Yeah, and actually one of the things that I remedied the moment I created my own businesses, and I have a whole passel of them, a portfolio of purpose-led businesses, is that in every time you create a new business, I mean, it's easier to do when you're starting something fresh. You have the opportunity to create an employee manual.
Sure.
Or create sort of a policy manual. It's almost like an operating agreement. If you start out and maybe you're a solopreneur, or you have an LLC and maybe you have your first hire or your second hire, right? that's the moment to sort of codify and write down how you want to handle these things. And then, of course, check them with a lawyer, right? But don't let the lawyer tell you what you have to do. Instruct the lawyer to express your intention in the best possible way that is still compliant. And there are law firms that can help you with that, and that'll be maybe a topic for another conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna say finding those lawyers is tricky. I definitely know a couple, but you know, it is usually not just like employment lawyer X that's like down the street from you. There's usually someone who is more thinking in a more conscious or regenerative like way that would be helpful in those contexts. I also think even before you're thinking about, you know, like employee handbook or policies or stuff like that, one of the things that is like foundational from what I see in establishing good working relationships with employees is having clear values for the organization, for yourself and for the organization, having a clear purpose and having a clear vision, so that as people are coming into the organization, you are having conversations about what those values, values, vision, and purpose of the organization are, to see if there's alignment, or if folks are like, I don't know what you're talking about. That all sounds crazy. I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah, I don't disagree on that. Although I think the danger is, or what I've seen, let me put it this way, is that people spend a lot of time, especially in social impact organizations, right? They spend a lot of time getting to clarity on mission, values, purpose, culture, all of that. And then they hire somebody whose job it is to do all the pesky other stuff, right? The financial systems, the HR systems, etc. And oftentimes there's no reconciliation between sort of the aspirational, strategic vision side of the house and then the operational underbelly.
Right, there has to be a practice to be using those things as the compass that's guiding the decisions throughout the whole organization.
And that's where, and I found myself in situations where I've said, like, why are we doing things this way? This is completely counter to our values.
Yeah.
Oh, because that's just how it's done. It's like, no. Like, like the ones, and maybe I will do a session just on feedback, right? I'll never forget a coach and mentor of mine, Carol Sanford, who passed away.
I love Carol Sanford.
Fantastic.
Beautiful.
So Carol was always on everybody's case. How do you get aligned? Like, everything needs to align to your essence, right, or your purpose, including all the operational systems, right? And that's where you get this massive divide. Where people are just not are completely out of alignment. And out of sync. And then I think that has to be a really deliberate decision, making sure that all 100%. Your operational systems also line up, and having the confidence as a business leader, whether you're the founder or an executive, to say, well, these operational systems don't serve us because they're out of alignment with our values, then need reimagining. And that takes time and resources to do right.
Agreed. And I think one of the most important questions that I find myself asking myself a lot of days is when I come up to those situations where it's like, oh, well, this is how we do that. And let me just fill out my little form over here and do my thing. Sometimes I've more and more, I pause and like, wait, but why am I doing it this way?
Right.
Is this the way that is the most comfortable for me? Is it the most convenient? Is it the way that I've always been doing it? And then like trying to think through the second piece of that, which is how does it actually align with A, what I'm trying to achieve, and B, what I like believe in, like from a values sort of standpoint, which I think this runs afoul of like another like core business principle of maybe just the United States, which is you must be productive and you must do it quickly. And creativity and like thoughtfulness are like slow, spacious processes that sort of do not fit in that world.
Right. So true. I'm going to tell you a story about how I made somebody cry, but they were tears of joy. And then I want to get into some of the specific offerings that your company brings into this HR domain. And I've been telling people we're going to be talking about putting humanity back into human resources, which may or may not be an adequate characterization of or cartoon of what you do. And I just want to point people to the Q&A section. Thank you, Matthew, for stepping in there, modeling the Q&As. And he surfaced a resource, the Management Center, that helps him think about things like rewriting a harassment policy, for example. So there are tools out there, and if you have any other resources you want to surface, that'd be great, Elise. But I would want to talk to you about the time I made somebody cry, and they were good tears, which is when I had a startup. We hired a person into a startup, and a little in the interview process, she said, "Oh, and I'm pregnant." I'm like, "Well, that cannot matter to me as a matter of law. It doesn't matter, and it also cannot and should not matter." And she said, "Well, what's your policy? Do you have a policy?" And like, "Well, here we are, a cash-starved startup. Of course we had no policy. We had no policies, full stop." And so I turned around and said, "Well, would you like to write our policy for parental leave? Because we don't have one." And she burst into tears and she said, "Nobody has ever asked me to just do the thing that would be right for me." And of course, she knew what we were, like a, bootstrapped startup. So she wrote this very reasonable policy that we actually adopted. And I've since adopted it in a bunch of other places where people needed leave for a variety of reasons. And I'm here to share it with everyone for free. And it was basically, you give as much notice ahead of time as you need time off for any reason. Right? So if you're sick today and you need tomorrow off, it's 1 day for 1 day. If you're going on a 3-week vacation in 3 weeks' time, then that's great. We need your notice today, right? And that gives you time to plan. But guess what? That also works for pregnancy or adoption, because you have time. Like, you're not gonna, unless you're already 8.5 months pregnant, you're not going,
Right, which in theory somebody might notice.
Somebody might notice. But it actually gives you that planning horizon and that agency, right? And in our case of the cash-starved startup, we didn't have a lot of things we could do by way of paid leave, but we could give her unpaid leave and guarantee her job would be there when she came back. And so there are ways that you can get very creative with, what feels right. Like, and I was surprised by how well that policy has worked in a number of settings and how easy it is for people to understand. Oh yeah, it makes sense. Like, if I want to go on sabbatical in 6 months' time, I should give you 6 months notice, like, or whatever the 1-for-1 is. So tears of joy generated by yours truly in the context of developing what's essentially an HR policy or an element of an HR policy. But tell us about some of the things businesses can tap you for, because part of the purpose here is to sort of showcase what people like you are doing by way of providing actionable, tangible solutions.
Yeah, so Conscious Revolution does a lot of different things. I think holistic organizational consulting is probably like the biggest bucket that we're going to talk about. And then within that bucket, we offer different kinds of trainings, things around decision making or difficult conversations, lots of different kinds of trainings that we can do. Some are 2 hours long, some are half a day, directly specifically for teams or for communities or just groups in general. So that's another little bucket that's inside the big bucket. And then we also do a lot of facilitation, talking about nonprofits. One of the things that we've done a lot of recently is facilitating nonprofit board retreats. It is so hard to participate wholly in a thing when you're also trying to facilitate it. And that is something that I think a lot of organizations experience and struggle with. And so we get called in to not only help facilitate, but also even sometimes help shape the agenda, depending on what the ongoing things are within an organization. Sometimes it's purpose and values refreshing. Sometimes it has to do more with deeper relational work or like clearing tensions for a group. And all of this kind of weaves together and ties together and is related to our Soulful human resources practice, which is taking human resources and bringing that collaboration, that engagement, that sense of mutuality, respect, agency, like making it an actual relationship that feels, while obviously not going to be perfectly equitable because there is a monetary exchange in employment, but that has much more of a sense of equity in it, and that gives employees more than just money from their employers. We spend so much time at work, and we do everything there, from compensation and benefits assessments and analyses, handbook and policies. And then we're actually in the middle of, or I guess not the middle, the first portion of our first Soulful Human Resources cohort, where we're going through 6 different sort of specific phases within human resources. So inviting the right people in, which would be recruiting and hiring, onboarding and creating shared agreements, which is like expectation setting sort of in the real world, fostering contribution and collaboration, performance management, celebrating your people, which is rewards and recognition, and gracious offboarding, which is termination or separation. So really taking a look at each of those buckets and giving folks in the cohort a lot of resources and structure to the processes that we are already practicing with our one-on-one clients, and giving them tools to start bringing those things to their organizations internally. We will likely do another cohort in the fall, as a way to sort of bring Soulful HR to more people and invite more people into how we're practicing.
And so the target audience there are HR leads like Matthew, not to pick on you, but you identified yourself as such in the Q&A bucket. Is that the idea, that you bring people whose job it is to figure this out for their businesses or their companies, their organizations? Or
yeah, sometimes it's like executive directors. We definitely have a handful of HR folks. Sometimes it's someone who works in operations who's also kind of wearing that HR hat, maybe a little bit less formally. We even have some board members from a couple of nonprofits who are wanting to better support the organization more meaningfully as a board member. So there are a lot of different types of folks who are in our current cohort.
Where do you who is the most receptive to actually tackling this as a business responsibility, like sort of segment wise? Is it the nonprofits? Is it tech startups? Is it like where, like, both informed by your own practice and what you see in the field? Where do people actually want to get this right?
It's such an interesting question, because when I'm thinking about like running through my list in my mind, like, okay, who are our clients? Who's in the cohort? It's nonprofits, it's folks in manufacturing, it's tech startups, it's wealth management, it's people who care about other people. I'm not sure that they fit into a vertical necessarily, as like in a traditional sense, but they are people who started businesses or who work at organizations that care meaningfully about their employees, again, like as whole people, and are not just concerned with like, hey, did you hit your metrics this month?
Yeah.
I will say from experience, I've worked under a lot of different kinds of leaders, and I've been the person where there's been the leaders at the top, and then they were like, all right, you're here, fix the culture of this place. And it's like, that's not really how it works. Turns out you can't just beer a fridge and ping pong your way out of this one, as much as everyone might have wanted to do that. And I just like, there was no, I left the job because I was like, I can't, if the 2 people who are the leaders of this company don't genuinely believe that caring about the well-being of their employees matters, like, I can't fix that. That's a way bigger issue than I can tackle.
You know, that's actually such a good criterion right there. So in thinking about my own best, worst experience, that founder was also the guy who would be in the kitchen emptying the dishwasher. Like, he was actually modeling all the behaviors, which is incredibly important.
Yes.
So we talked a little bit about your cohort offering. Are there other ways people can tap into your Soulful HR? I'm just personally thinking like, oh man, where's the 1-800, better HR helpline that I can call?
Those do exist. We don't offer a hotline, and I'll tell you why, because this comes up a lot and we've talked about it a lot internally. But the reality is, whatever the thing that someone is calling about in that exact moment is, that they're like, oh my God, it's this thing, and I need your advice, I need an hour of your time. It's tied to a bigger thing that is deeper and more complicated and requires more information and more time and more exposure to like what is going on. Rarely have I ever had someone come. Actually, I had someone come to me the other day, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm just going out on a sabbatical, and I want to make sure that my team is taken care of while I'm out. I want to just have someone that they can call if anything comes up." And I was like, "Why is something coming up?" And she was like, "Well, we have one person on the team who's maybe not performing as well as the other people, and there's been some tension." I was like, it's like a much bigger thing that, like, if one of them called me while out on sabbatical, like I can't fix that. That's like a whole other set of things that needs to happen.
Problem. Right.
There are definitely people out there who will listen to you, and I can often be that person for people. Sometimes we'll have clients that'll come to us and they'll have what they perceive as a big problem, but really the problem is that they're just emotionally very attached to whatever the thing is, and they just need a place to talk about it. And then I don't hear from them again about that issue ever. So, so the hotline thing is definitely complicated and seems like a desire that folks have, but often ends up leading to much deeper conversations. We do offer a service where if you're not a current client or someone that we've worked with in the last like 6 months, and you need expedited support, you can contact us. It's a different rate, it's a different process, it's a different timeline. So that does exist. And a lot of our relationships are usually built from doing some sort of a deeper internal project. Sometimes it's like an HR organizational assessment that we'll do with folks that then leads to, okay, like now let's work together on your rewards and recognition program. Now that we like understand who you are as an organization, what your structures are, what already exists in place, who is doing what, like all of that stuff sort of like touches human resources.
Yeah, so I think that's good to put a pin in. You know, I guess it depends. Like if you're a more mature organization or maybe a startup, right? Like maybe there's different entry points, but either which way, addressing it as and we talked about this before people came on, like as a budget line item, right? Like put it in your P&L, HR, right, and make it a focus of your design of the whole operations, and don't just sort of put it aside and say, oh, we're just going to hire an HR expert, and then find yourself in the trap of now you're running things like we used to in the 1980s.
and so many, oh my gosh, I don't want that. And so many organizations will have, one HR person for 60 employees. Well, guess what they're doing all day? They're doing all of the day-to-day stuff that has to get done to maintain the benefits and the leave and the care and the things that are happening in those moments, that like getting to some of this bigger stuff, that it just becomes, it's like, oh, you'd like to redo your onboarding process. It ends up taking a year because all of the daily stuff is just
in the way.
It's up a lot of time.
Yeah, so you have to really elevate it to the leadership level and make it a focused project. I want to get to a couple of questions that people had submitted in ahead of time. And then if there are other questions, we do, thank you, Matthew, again, we have the Q&A functionality. So there's the ask a question button, and we can, if we have time, get to more. But one question that I think made me chuckle, and I think we probably both have answers for it, is there a particular HR best practice or sacred cow, or even a law, that you think provides the most ample excuse for employers to continue being shitty to themselves and their workers?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of minimum wage and at-will employment. Granted, at-will employment is not a federal level law. There's some states that don't use that. But it sucks. And it just is a way for employers to say, like, well, this isn't working for me, I'm going to fire you. We don't have to talk. It's how you end up with, hey, I'm firing you because I think you were undermining my authority. Like, that is an at-will employment excuse. That's not a real reason to fire. Like, you know what I mean? That was the first time I'd ever been spoken to. Like, there's no case against that. So yeah, I think that you're like, I think that at will employment. I think there's also, I don't know, I do think minimum wage is like, you're already setting the bar at a place where it's like, oh, I don't actually have to support people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Yeah. I think that sort of I think those are top of mind for me too. The minimum wage and the at will. Yeah, I'm hard pressed to find anything. I will add actually, it's not a law obviously, but it's a best practice, and it's the 360 anonymous feedback review that so many organizations have inherited from corporate America last century. I see that a lot, and it's this horrible way of doing accountability once a year, anonymous, and you get this, jury of your peers opining, but it's not like, oh, Elise did something yesterday. It's just like, she's been undermining my authority. It's this sort of like this vibe, or
to be fair, I probably was, and I just didn't know it.
Yeah,
realistically, knowing me.
And nobody said anything to you. And as one organizational coach once put it, well, here's a blind spot. Like, by definition, the person having the blind spot can't see it. So if you don't say something, how can the person change their behavior, right? And so it just drives me nuts. Like the 360 once a year reviews where then your entire, frequently compensation or promotion is tied to those review processes, right?
Don't get me started on that. That is a whole other world of things that I don't agree with.
It's a very triggering question. Thank you to whoever asked that. But I think those are some good contenders. Minimum wage, actual employment, 360 review.
I've got one other one that I think is specific maybe to the United States, and it's a law that doesn't exist, where there is no paid leave for medical leave for either it's caring for your family or raising a child or whatever. So
do not get me started on the whole pay. I'm clearly, you can tell from my accent, I was born in Germany. This is a very US centric conversation. I think all our guests, all viewers are from the US as well. Yeah, this would be a whole different conversation in other countries.
Right.
And yeah, I once had a conversation with sort of mixing a few of the hats that I wear with the gentleman who was in charge of the project in Estonia, the country of Estonia, where they put the entire population, everybody's data on blockchain and made it perfectly inspectable. And so it had this interesting effect that by the time you left the hospital with your newborn, they had their social security number, they were already registered for school, they had their pension set up, everything was basically, because it was all on chain. And so I asked him, what did you do? Like, what were there any savings? And he said it was an astonishing number. It was basically they saved 2% of their GDP. Wow. Let that sink in, 2% of the GDP. And so then I said, what did you do with it? What do you do with the savings? And you know what he said? We implemented, I think it was something like 18 months paid leave for all parents. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God, you just made me cry.
That's absolutely.
So we can't have nice things in the US. But that was a great question. So yes, and it's challenging just to take the US position on this, right? If you're trying to do a more generous paid leave, it's really hard. Again, you have to treat it as a budget line item, and it's doable, right? Like, as somebody who has been the CFO and the COO in various settings, various of the companies that I'm involved in, you can do that, and it takes very deliberate planning and good luck trying to talk to your investors about it. If you're at all venture funded, if you've taken in outside investors, it's a very, very tough conversation to have about, although in some cases it can be easier if you have copious amounts of venture capital. You could say, this is how we do retention. But it's a very tricky path to, especially if you're in the nonprofit world, to say, and we have a policy of, 4, 5, 6 months of paid leave. It's very difficult. I mean, we got there with the organization that I was leading, but I mean, we were a $12 million or $15 million organization at the time. And we had really healthy net assets. So it's a design problem, but it's if you treat it as such, it can also be solved.
I think the other thing that just came to my mind, that's not a law, but there is sort of this thing that happens in a lot of companies where HR reports to the CFO.
Oh, yes.
And just like, don't do that.
Oh, I love that.
Don't ever do that. Human resources needs to be on your leadership team. They need to have their own voice, their own seat, because so much of what is being advocated for through a human resources lens costs money. And if they were reporting to the CFO is already fighting against themselves then. Even if they want to do the thing, they have a different fiduciary responsibility, and it needs to be coming from a different place, and needs to have the same weight as the monetary components. Because guess what?
That's a good point.
If without all of the people that work at your company, the company probably doesn't exist. So investing in them and the things that they need to show up is very important.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue to the other question we had come in, which is, how do you maintain good practices over time, given entropy and the race to the bottom pressures? And you're just alluding to it. So
yeah, well, I think I hate the race to the bottom so deeply. So I'm so glad somebody brought that up. I think it's like one of my things that just makes me insane whenever I read about somebody who's like, oh, we figured out a way to shave 5 cents off this thing that already costs only 60 cents. Like, stop doing that. I think one of the things that is super important, and it's like a lot of people who start businesses, entrepreneurs, people who are like founders or coming in to like run a business, especially at a smaller level, their initial thinking isn't like, oh, I'm starting this business because I just want to be a billionaire. That's it. That's all I want. It's usually like, oh, I'm starting this business because I have a really unique and interesting idea that I want to bring to the world, or I feel I am differently qualified to answer a particular problem. And I think getting back to that core of like, why does your business exist on a regular basis, whether it's every couple of years, whether it's every 5 or 10 years, and reestablishing like, what are your values and what is your purpose? We did this with a client a number of years ago who'd had the same purpose for 10 years. And upon looking at it, they were like, oh, that's crazy. We actually already did that like 3 years ago. So like the purpose that they had was was like, check. And so so it wasn't resonating with anybody, particularly new people coming into the organization, because they were like, oh yeah, didn't we get an award for that? Like, why are we still talking about that? And so upon redoing it and involving all 150 employees in the process of like, okay, what is our new purpose? You're all, to use a metaphor that I don't love, but is everywhere, like rowing in the same direction. I said I was going to quote Brene Brown when I posted about this on LinkedIn yesterday.
True, you did.
So this is it. I'm bringing her in. It's not a direct quote, but she tells a story in her most recent book, Strong Ground, which I read and mostly enjoyed. And she talks about going to, I don't remember where it was. I'm going to botch this, so sorry in advance. She talks about going to a hospital and running into a woman in the elevator, and the woman was bringing a cart of slices of cake up to wherever she was going. And Brene like looks at her and they have a conversation, and she says, oh, what do you do here? And the woman goes, well, I cure cancer. Because in her mind, she's like, the food that I make and serve to these people gives them the power to keep doing the work that they're doing, which is actual doctors. They're actually the ones meeting with the patients and they're doing the research, but she's part of the chain of this stuff. And she understood the whole purpose of that hospital. That was a teaching hospital, I think, was to cure cancer. And she felt that connected to it and part of it in a meaningful way. So that I think should be the goal.
That should be the goal. I think I like the idea of sort of doing a sort of a regular, almost like an annual review of all the sort of operating systems and sort of gut checking it, right, with the team, and saying, does this still serve us? Is it still aligned? And sort of make it more of a, like, if you have a policy manual, make it a living document. It's not something that goes on itself. But review it and make sure it serves your purpose, it's aligned. And then if it isn't, make a change. I think that whole sort of race to the bottom, that only happens if you are not paying attention, right? Like if you're not clear and have documented your assumptions, right? Like I think,
Yeah.
I mean, you could even say we will not do anything just because it's a cost-saving measure, right? That could be the
Well, I was going to say,
first line in your employee manual and say,
I
hey,
think it becomes a race to the bottom when your only focus is on the profit, is a profitability focus, when you're not looking at the other through the other lenses. I mean, there are so many definitions of success, and obviously as a for-profit business, you need to make money to exist. But like at Conscious Revolution, it was like when we, sat down and have had financial conversations, we've worked with a fractional CFO before. The conversation was like, okay, we're not like, it was never like, okay, we need to grow 20% year over year for the next 5 years. It was like, okay, we want to work 4 days a week and we want to take 2 weeks off in the summer and we want to all get paid enough that we feel comfortable. And the conversation was more about like, what are all of the different ways that we are defining success for ourselves, and not just like, how do we make the most money imaginable?
Yeah, actually, another answer to that question just occurred to me. It's something we talked in while we were getting ready, and that is make HR, like make the people costs, make that a hard cost.
Yeah.
Right. And keep track of it. And it's kind of shocking. I feel like I'm saying the most obvious thing in the world. And as you pointed out, HR costs are frequently considered soft costs. Right. When we can quantify the churn of people, the turnover, we can quantify how much it costs us to pay a recruiter at the C-suite level, right? We can quantify all these things. Like, how long does it take for you to train up a new employee when your focus will be divided because you're bringing somebody on board, right, over the course of 30 or 90 days, right? All these things are quantifiable. And if you do that, if you actually track and quantify, then you're less likely to experience this race to the bottom, right? Because very quickly, it becomes clear that, I mean, you can make profit one of two ways, right? Reduce your costs or increase your revenue. Right. And actually, retention is a cost-saving measure. And most people don't see it that way because we've not been trained to see it. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that becomes, again, that's a choice that you can make in a business of any kind, for profit or non-profit, and that's where your CFO can actually be very helpful. Figure out how to track against that.
Yeah, agreed.
Wow, see, I think I could just keep talking with you all day. This is fun. We did say we're only going to be here for an hour. I know people have to move on to other things. So, Elise, I want to make sure that you drop in the chat where people can reach you. I think everybody knows me, but make sure you share your information, and we'll also send out a blast to everybody who registered to make sure they know where to find you. But before we sign off, like, do you have any preferred terms for human resources? Because just the idea that we're treating humans as resources makes me kind of nauseous. Sometimes it's called people ops. What do you like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think they all sort of serve a different purpose. I don't know. I guess I care a lot less about what you call it and versus like how you're practicing it. So if you want to call it people ops or culture and talent or human resources or whatever the mashup of those things is, you probably need all of them realistically. Like, it's I want people to focus less on like, okay, we have to have the right titles, but it's like how are you showing up, and how is that influencing the work and the organization and the relationships between other people. And I think that's the most meaningful part.
Oh, I love that. So it's not what you call it, it's what you make of it.
Yes. Exactly.
All right. So maybe we call it, I'm back to, keep the humanity in your human resources. Maybe that's a bumper sticker we need to give everybody. And yeah, so that's a good way to for people to even parse amongst themselves, like how they want to show up, and ask other people, like when you hire on, what is your approach to the humans and the human resources?
Yeah. Everyone who's looking for a job right now should be asking that question.
Yeah. Oh, well, on that note, I think this was great, Elise. Thank you so much for coming on, being the first in a list of people who are opining on how we actually practically built the businesses that are better for the world. So really appreciate you coming on today and hanging out with me and having this conversation. And hopefully folks in the audience got something out of it. Everybody stayed with it for the hour. Oh, thank you. There's like a little flapping hand. I love that. So clearly audience reactions are enabled. I'm still learning all the features of Google Meet. And yeah, let's do this again sometime. And
Yes.
let's definitely stay in touch. And again, thanks everyone for joining today. This was fun on my end. Hope you all got something out of it. And yeah, see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Elise.
Astrid. Take
All
care.
right. Bye all.
Bye.